For a long time, music in film has been a reliable way to elicit emotion in the viewer. But sound design can be just as powerful, and so subtle that the viewer doesn't even realise their emotions are being manipulated. A great example of this can be seen in Parasite, a 2019 South Korean film centred around a juxtaposition between lower and upper class families. In one particular scene, the background ambience is used in place of a music track to create tension for the viewer. And in this video, we're going to dissect the process behind this and recreate it for our own purposes. Now, before we go any further, I'll warn you that this scene occurs very close to the end of the film, so if you don't want any spoilers, then you'll want to come back after you've watched the film yourself. Otherwise, let's continue. The scene follows one of the main characters, Ki-woo, as he jumps into a basement where two potentially hostile characters were imprisoned earlier in the film. Let's have a listen to the clip and see how the ambience works.
괜찮아요? 저기요.
We can hear how little sound is being used here, creating a tension that slowly rises as the snare hovers over Ki-woo's head, and then releases as it snaps against his neck. In an interview with soundeffect.com, link in the description, sound supervisor Ralph Tae-young Choi gives some insight into how the sound was used to aid the tension in the scene. He says, quote, "The airtone in the basement was designed differently in colour and size according to Ki-woo's anxious psychology. Instead of score, we used the air ambient sound to express tension of Ki-woo's psychological state." He continued further down the article saying, "To create a strange, uneasy feeling, you need to use sounds that aren't natural or familiar. To create new strange noises, I use filters or EQs to design tones and then layer these designed sounds together. I sometimes increase or decrease the length of the sound, and I also add air to the sound using reverb. A lot of careful time was put into designing this basement tone, but how easy would it be to create a tense ambience using only sources found around your house? Well, I decided to give it my best shot." Alright, let's have a listen to all our recorded sounds. The purpose here isn't to replicate the tones used in the original film, but to design something that elicits the same effect on the viewer. The first recording was captured from the fan behind my PC tower. This gives us a brilliant low-end rumble that can be sustained throughout to help create some dread.
What we really need to do is create a powerful sense of dread.
Next is a recording of a CRT television. This sound isn't suitable in its current form, but I'm sure with some pitch shifting and effects, we can make it work. Next is the boiler in my kitchen. This is a really great sound and can serve as the main body of the ambience. Through some reverb, I can see this having a really nice airiness to fill out the basement in the film. Next up is a recording of the mic pointing into a cup. This was a strange idea I had to try and warp my own room ambience. Since I live next to a main road, you can hear traffic passing by in the recording, but the cup makes it sound very tubey. You'll notice a pulsing low frequency sound, which is electrical interference from the recorder, because I really needed to bring the noise floor up to hear this recording. Maybe we can use it though. Lastly is a recording of my finger running around the rim of a mug. In the film's original sound, I noticed a very subtle sound of pipes in the basement, and I think the metallic ring of the mug could work in providing that character to the ambience. In their current state, these recordings won't be much use, so it's time to start getting creative. I'm going to begin with the boiler recording, because I can see this serving as our main foundation for the ambience. We can't do much with the monofile, so let's duplicate this to another track and offset the duplicate by about 50% so there's no possibility of phase issues. Spread the panning and we've got a nice wide sound. The sound has a lot of commanding presence at the moment and still sounds like it's coming from a machine rather than acting as an ambience, so let's play with some pitch shifting to see what kind of tones we can get out of it. Lowering by 2 octaves sounds a bit lifeless, while 1 octave sounds too tonal. After some experimenting, I found that lowering by 16 semitones was a good balance, and also sounded quite uneasy. I'm happy with this, so let's pack these 2 layers into a bus for some effect processing. I want to remove a lot of this high frequency content to make it less present, which I'll then subtly replace with reverbs. I'll also use a bell curve here to try and bring out any harmonic content I find particularly interesting. Finally, I just like to get rid of the sub-audible garbage that isn't being used so it doesn't affect any potential compression later. Now let's add some reverb, which will provide some natural air to the tone and help smudge the overall sound a bit. Again, I'm experimenting with bell curves to see if there are any harmonics that can be used. I'll make some final adjustments to the overall sound now, removing more high end, as I felt it was a bit too present. It's always important to compare your changes to the original sound. You can hear that the reverb has added a nice spooky air to everything. I'm happy with this for now, so let's move on. I'm going to work on the sound of the microphone in the mug next because it's the most similar to my current sound and it'll be easier to figure out where it should fit in. The noise floor has really been pushed up in this recording and it's rife with electrical interference. Under nearly all circumstances, a recording this infected with noise would go straight in the bin.
What is that sound? Is that coming from your laptop? It's not supposed to sound... What the... What's all that crap? Oh, Jen, I have to fix this.
No, leave it. I have it how I like it.
How you like it? No, Jen, it's infected. If this was a human being, I'd shoot it in the face.
So to save this recording, we're going to have to work extra hard to hide all this noise. Let's begin by filtering out anything that won't add value to our ambience. Next, let's add a huge amount of reverb directly on the channel and remove all of the dry signal. This will smudge all the transients in the sound and give it width. What we're left with is a creepy air that sounds nothing like the original recording. Let's check how this fits in with our boiler sound. Just these 2 recordings have created a great body to our ambience, so we'll want to look at more nuanced sounds we can use to add some character next. I'm going to move on to the recording of my finger circling the rim of the mug. The aim of this is to provide the ambience some metallic overtones that give the viewer the sense of pipework in the basement. The recording was pretty short, so I'm going to quickly duplicate, crossfade and bounce it to a new track. I want the sound to be very subtle, so I'll begin by removing a lot of the high frequency content. It's going to take some experimentation to figure out where exactly I want my cutoff point to be. Removing too much high frequency content will dull the character of the sound beyond what we want, but removing too little will make it sound too present in the mix. Pitch shifting can help move the harmonic content I want to use into a less present frequency range. Again, we can use reverb to smear the sound a bit and hide some of the crackling noise in the higher frequencies. There are a few options for how we could design this reverb. We could make it quite large so that it spreads across the whole ambience, or we could focus it so it sounds more like it's coming from a positioned pipe somewhere in the scene. I think the best course of action here is to have a long decay but narrow spread, because we can throw it to the back of the scene, making it sound like it's emanating from somewhere down the long narrow corridor. It still doesn't sound weighty enough to be a large metal pipe, so let's try some different pitches along with some final EQ adjustments before committing to the sound. Okay, that sounds great. Let's move on. The other recording that could create some interesting characters is the CRT Television. I can't say I had a plan for this when I chose to record it, so this will require a fair amount of experimentation. This recording is also pretty short, so I'll do another duplication, crossfade and bounce before beginning. A great thing about this recording is that it's been recorded at 96 kHz. This means that when I pitch it down, a lot of the frequency content that was initially too high for a person to hear can be brought down to an audible range. Pitching the sound down by 2 octaves seems like a good place to start, and I've added a reverb to help blend it in. Let's experiment with some EQ to see what tones we can get out of the recording. The fundamental frequency can easily draw too much attention, so there's a balancing act to be had. Okay, let's see if this adds any subtle value to the overall sound yet. It definitely adds a bit of uneasiness to things, but it doesn't really sit right. What would Mick Gordon do? Oh yeah. Alright, let's put this bitch through an amp. I think the role of this tone should definitely be to create something more surreal that's so subtle it almost subconsciously affects the viewer. I'm just using the stock amp modeler in my DAW, which adds some grit to the sound and also accentuates some of the low frequency content we couldn't really hear before. This is sounding really cool now. I'll add a bit of subtle movement to it using an auto panner. I think this sounds a bit too noticeable if placed after the reverb, so I'll move it up the chain. It's still not quite uneasy enough, so let's add some pitch movement and see how that affects things. Oh my god, did this seriously come from the almost unusable CRT recording? Let's see how this sounds with the rest of the ambience after some pitch automation. Now it's time for the recording of the PC fan. This is a great technique for getting low-end rumble. It's easy to be tempted to just low-pass white noise for this sort of application, but you come to realise how dull that sounds in comparison, even with some saturation. This is the sound the audience needs to literally feel in the cinema, and you as the sound designer can control how much of this sensation they're feeling at certain moments using automation. If we listen to the original clip, you can hear the ambience becomes louder when the camera focuses on the dead body for the second time. And the tension continues to subtly grow until the snare snaps around Kiwu's neck. The sound follows what the audience would and should be feeling in the moment, right up to when the tension is released. We need to create this effect with our own ambience, so we'll need to follow the video footage for this. I'll quickly align our audio files to the correct point, and then we can start to automate things. I'm also going to bring all of our sounds down in level, so that they're closer to what we'd hear in the film, plus I'll give them a slight rebalancing. Now that we've got our bass levels, let's work on automating this rumble sound. Okay, so that wasn't amazing. I definitely anticipated the cut to the dead body happening far too early, so I'll fix that first and then tweak the rest of the track. I'm also experimenting with dropping the tension slowly after the dead body shot to make the build at the end more impactful. This'll do for now, so I'll start working on the other tracks. For the boiler, I've done another volume automation that has a similar contour to the rumble. The mic in the mug recording contained its own dynamics, so I cut and shifted the recording to place some of the more harmonically rich parts at the tense points in the video, with some additional volume automation. For the metallic pipe-like layer, I tried to make the sound less consistent in volume so it would poke in and out of the scene. Since the sound is supposed to be emitting from down the hallway, I like the idea of having it pop in as Kiwi turns his head and looks over his shoulder, not because he's reacting to it, but simply to draw the viewer's attention as he gazes over. Finally, for the Surreal CRT recording, I used a different approach and automated a low-pass filter. It's important that the scene doesn't sound noticeably surreal, so removing a lot of the strange resonances in the beginning helped subtly fit this sound in. They can then be filtered back in as the other tracks increase in level, helping to keep it somewhat masked. I ended up using the same technique on the boiler sound to bring in a bit more air at the end. Okay, so all that's left to do now is perform the final touch-ups to everything, which shouldn't take long at all.
6 hours later.
Alright, so we've got our ambience. I've grouped all the sounds into a bus, which is then volume automated so everything moves together nicely. This is in addition to all the previous automation, not a replacement. Let's see how this works with the film. Luckily, since the ambience in the original scene is so quiet, I can use Isotope RX to remove it and retain the character audio. Now let's compare it to the original. I'm really happy with how our one has performed. It's not quite as subtle as Choi's original, but produces largely the same effect in the scene, which is exactly what we were hoping for. So, this shows just how easy it is to take even the most unusable recordings from your home and turn them into a really tense film atmosphere. If you found this video useful, then feel free to leave a like, and of course constructive criticism is always welcome. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you around.